Vocal mother of 6, grandmother of soon to be 12. But more than that, I'm the chair of the first Peace Caucus of the Democratic Party. And it's Lane County now, but we're working on the whole state. And we will be the very first Peace Caucus in the United States of America. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming, and believe me, you'll be hearing from me again. But first of all, I want to say we're all here because there's a gentleman and his wife standing at the back. His name is Dennis Kucinich. Let's stand up and cheer up. Kucinich is the representative, the honorable representative from the state of Ohio. He likes to go to Hawaii, but he's from Ohio. And he is in his 6th term. He has a beautiful wife named Elizabeth, and they were married in '05. And actually, we are just darn lucky to have this guy here. And the reason really that I'm standing up here is because he is the author of the Department of Peace bill. This bill, when it becomes enacted with all our helps, and of course Dennis and Elizabeth's help, is hope for us, for our future, for our children, for our grandchildren, for those who are yet unborn. And so I'm going to give the mic to Val Hoyle, who is the chair of the Democratic Party of Lane County, because these two lovely people are now official members of the Democratic Party of Lane County, and then Dennis is going to speak to all of us.
Should speak, but all of you know that we have a card-carrying membership program, and we want to make Dennis and Elizabeth official, honorary, lifetime card-carrying members of the Democratic Party of Lane County. We did provide them wallet-sized cards as well.
Good evening. It's so good to be here. It's great to see all of you. Good evening. It's great to be here in Eugene. Thank you so much for coming. This community believes in peace so much that when Betsy was standing up here in front of the Shalom and no sound came out, I thought, well, that makes sense. Silence. We'll just meditate for an hour. Please join me in thanking Betsy and everyone who put this program together. So we're standing at the back, and since we're at a church, you know, the religious instincts take over, and the moment I was about to call up to Betsy, you know, lift up your voice. So thank you for giving me a chance to lift my voice here. And this, of course, is familiar territory. Some of you may know, some of you may not, that it was about 25 years ago I came this close to being a resident of this county. Because here's the story. The Emerald Public Utility District was holding competition for a general manager. And so they had about 200 applicants from all over the country. And it came down to 2 finalists, of which I was one. And it was a very close vote on the board. And I really was very excited about the possibility of coming out, and I was interviewed out here. And I was just talking to one of the members of the EPUT groups there, and we were talking about how if I had gotten a job, maybe Lon Topaz would be up here as a candidate for President of the United States. But you never know where fate will take you. But it was actually my effort to take a stand to save Cleveland's municipal electric system, which led me on a kind of political and spiritual odyssey that inevitably put me in competition for a general manager's job out at Emerald. And it's a good place to start for this discussion because all of us wonder what we would do in a certain circumstance if we're called upon to take a stand. And in 1977, I was elected mayor of Cleveland on a promise to save our publicly owned electric system from a takeover by a utility monopoly. And as all of you know, it really does matter how much people pay for electricity. That rates vary widely and wildly around the country. And in Cleveland, historically, utility rates from the utility that was owned by the municipality were anywhere from 20 to 30% cheaper. So when I was elected mayor, I said, I'm going to save this system. Well, what happened was that I won the election on a promise to save the electric system, canceled a sale that had already been consummated by the previous mayor and the council, and proceeded to restore the system to the city. But then the largest bank in Cleveland came forward and told me, look, you're going to sell that system to this private utility company, which was a business partner of the bank's, or we're not going to renew the city's credit. And so it all came down to a moment on December 15, 1978. And at that time, I was then the 32-year-old mayor of one of the largest cities in the country, and I was given a choice. And the choice was that either I would agree to sell this city's electric system and give up the public's right to operate its own power system to this utility monopoly, or I was going to take a stand and say, no, this is wrong, I'm not going to do it. And I knew when I made that decision that my career was on the line because all the media in town, the banks, the utilities, the business community, both political parties had decided that, well, we're going along with the sale of this light system. And so in a sense, I was standing alone. And the community at that time really didn't understand why I was standing so strongly for this, what I felt was an inherent right of people to have a system, a light system they could call their own. Anyone in this room who's ever taken a stand, has ever had to stand alone, knows the kind of pressures that can come up. There are times when the world seems like it's turning upside down, where you're standing for the truth and everyone believes something else. It was, I lost the election in 1979 because the city of Cleveland was put into default by the bank. 15 years later, the city of Cleveland expanded its electric system because it was saved, and the largest expansion in the country. And it was then realized that, well, this wouldn't have happened if someone hadn't taken a stand a few years earlier. So at that point, people were saying, well, Dennis was right, and where is he? Because I had been out of public office for the better part of 15 years. I tell this story as a backdrop for my own experience right now. taking a stand for peace in the United States Congress and taking a stand for peace as a candidate for president. Wall Street, you know, if war was not profitable, Wall Street would stop it. Wall Street, the media, both political parties now, are all telling us that we have no choice but to continue war. It's as if our sensibilities about our external reality are so powerfully challenged that we sometimes have trouble understanding what's real and what's not. We're being told that war is the essential reality of this world and that the war on terror is a fact that we have to live with. This is what we're being told. This is a reality that's being impressed on us. And yet, in our heart of hearts, we know that at the core of this story is a lie. In our heart of hearts, we understand that not only did we not have to be in the war and the occupation that the United States finds itself at the moment, but that choices were made that took us in that direction, and we took a road that did not have to be traveled. And so now we are called upon, once again, to determine what's true and what's not. Our politics today would seem to put truth on the scale with gold bars. And the one who has the most gold is the one who tells the truth. Our politics would seem to say the truth is measured by consensus. That if you have everyone agreeing on a lie, well, it must be so. We had a majority of members of Congress who agreed with the lie that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that Iraq was getting ready to attack this country. And even now, after there's been so much information out there, the tendency is to continue to support the lie based on the size of the lie and the hold it has in our society. The war on terror, a monstrous lie, told to keep war in perpetuity upon this nation and in the world. And as people buy into it, they just feel, well, war is inevitable. And everywhere they look, they see war. And everywhere they look, they see war must continue. And yet through this attempt to try to reconstruct our social reality so that we believe that war is peace, we still have within our hearts and within our spirits this sensibility that says, my God, it shouldn't be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. My God, what's happening to our nation? What's happening to our civil liberties? What's happening to our capacity for compassion, for empathy, for peace? And so, this evening, here in Eugene, Oregon, we have an opportunity to explore in depth our own sense of well-being, our own sense of connection with the world, our own desires to reconnect from the wellspring of our deep humanity to people all around the world, as brothers and sisters, to affirm human unity, to understand that the world is indeed interconnected and interdependent, that we all are indeed one, citizens of a common planet, citizens with a common destiny, of one spirit. And how great is our responsibility to be able to come from a place of insisting upon the imperative of human unity and of insisting that all those who would try to divide us, left, right, black, white, Republican, Democrat, red, blue, rich, poor, any of those divisions, do not reveal the essence of who we are. That underneath all of that, there is a connection. And underneath all of that, we have a responsibility to insist on human unity and to reject a politics which tries to divide this country between itself and divide us from the other nations and peoples of the world. And so this evening, we begin a new opportunity to envision the America that we want from our deepest intentions, not from our fears. The America that we want, which stands for peace, which stands for abolishing all nuclear weapons, which stands for international justice and participation in the International Criminal Court, which stands for protecting the global climate and signing the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty, which stands truly for the abolition of all biological and chemical weapons and landmines and small arms, so that we can use our creative potential to create that beloved community. This evening, we can think about our potential to take the faith which we have, that's imminent from the power of our soul, and look at the world as it's being presented to us. This world which we're being told is a world simply of war. And to know that behind that illusion of war is another reality waiting to be called forth by our faith, by the quality of our vision, by our creativity. We reach out and pull forth, call forth that vision of peace, that vision of human unity, that vision of interdependence and interconnection, and we call it forth, and we name it, and we give it force, and we give it presence, and we create a new country and a new world from our own powerful intention to create it. Come, my friends. It is not too late to seek a newer world. Come, my friends, said Tennyson. 'Tis not too late to seek a newer world. For us, it's not simply about imagining, because the imagination, too, has the power to fling an idea far out into the future. But we also understand our power to fashion time and to create within a circumference of time. So we not only imagine, we do create. That is the genesis of the Department of Peace, that we can look at circumstances in our own lives and take the principles of great religious leaders like Christ, like Gandhi, like Dr. King, principles of peace and nonviolence, and integrate them into our everyday lives. And before a crowd and advocate peace on earth. It's quite easy, actually. But when you take those principles and you try to bring them into your own life, it becomes a little bit more complicated. Peace on earth, of course, but I'll be home later, honey. The idea is that we have this opportunity of creating peace in the macrocosm by bringing it into our own homes. And by creating structures in our own society that address those issues that divide us at home. Domestic violence, spousal abuse, child abuse, violence in the schools. All the symptomatologies of violence in our society come from the confluence of a belief that we can't do anything about it, and a lack of support for those social structures which are in place to try to do something about it. And so that dynamic tension of, well, can't do anything about it, want to do something about it, is always meeting, and with the lack of resources, generally, all the good intentions of people who are working all over this country to try to create safer homes and healthier homes emotionally, psychologically, are having difficulty being realized. But this idea of a Department of Peace comes forward at a time that people are looking for ways of strengthening the capacity that each of us has towards building peace in our own homes and our own lives. When we gather together in religious services, we are taught, and we sing, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." The potency of that hymn leads us to an understanding that peace which is intentional, peace that develops within us, suddenly becomes a light that lights the world. The reciprocity between peace within and peace that we extend brings deep wisdom to the words, "My peace I give you." Every one of us hungers for that. But how do we do it in a society that is so saturated with thoughts of war? The idea of a Department of Peace and Nonviolence is not a new idea in American history. A couple hundred years ago, it was thought about in the context of a kind of a soaring diplomacy whose purpose was to create peace. Benjamin Rush was one of the first people to talk about it. But when I, as a member of Congress, saw the virus of war work its way through the thinking of my fellow colleagues as they were preparing to affirm the Clinton administration's policies to attack Serbia, I came to an understanding how war can work its way through the will of a legislature and find its way through expression in public policy. And it got me thinking, how is war created? What is this thing, this inconscient force that finds its way of developing headlong momentum towards destruction? What is this? Where does this come from? And so when I saw that event in the late 90s, I knew that it was an opportunity to explore war in a way that I never had before. I discovered that over 100 million people perished in war in the 20th century, most of them innocent civilian non-combatants. I thought about how war begins and how people get disconnected from their heart. And so I did a lot of studying, and I crafted this legislation to create a Department of Peace and Nonviolence, and introduced it on July the 11th, 2001, 2 months before 9/11. We move forward to the future. We can still see the grip that war has on our country, that it has in our imagination, that it has in the psyches of our leaders. And we sense more than ever the disconnection this leadership has from our own aspirations. And it's quite heartbreaking to know that this nation that we love, this nation whose work is being done often in our name, has gone so far away from the vision that we have of what a just and fair nation ought to be, has gone so far away from the America we love. And so this is the moment that we call it all back, that we breathe in the thought of peace, that we think peace, that we speak words of peace, that we act in a manner that insists on structures of peace in our home, in our communities, in our cities, in our states, in our nations, and in the world. Elizabeth and I have traveled all over the world since we had the joyous opportunity to become one. And we have met with people at every level of society, just common citizens, some of whom lived in the street, diplomats, parliamentarians, and I can tell you, that there is such a hunger for peace all over the world, that people are longing to be connected again, that people feel a great sense of sadness being detached from the America that they once knew. I want to share with you a story, and then we'll go to questions, because this really will tell you of our responsibility to dedicate our lives, to work to change this entire culture and to change this country. I stood up in the Congress last summer and warned this country that it could not stand by while Lebanon, South Lebanon, was being destroyed. And I offered one proposal after another and urged the United States to intervene to stop the bombing. But the United States refused to do it. Immediately after the war against Lebanon, Elizabeth and I flew to South Lebanon. We flew into Syria, actually, traveled into Lebanon. The only American official, to my knowledge, to have gone south of the Litani River. Now, it was widely understood that while Israel was dropping the bombs, a number of the armaments were purchased or were sent over by the United States. It was widely assumed and understood. Elizabeth and I saw something that I'll just never forget. There were 30,000 structures that were destroyed south of the Litani River. Homes, bridges, highways, water systems, sewer systems, schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, lemon groves, apple orchards, destroyed. Stadiums, cemeteries, destroyed. Everything. It was a wasteland. You would see people sitting on rubble in front of their stores because that's the only place they had ever been in their daily lives, just sitting there in shock, waiting to see some familiar faces come by. We walked through the rubble, seeing landmines everywhere, broken pieces of lives, seeing a lot of familiar sights of computers and televisions and shoes and books and English reading books and French reading books and you see this debris of war. Seeing cluster bombs with the name California written on it. Cluster bombs that had been purchased from American companies. We visited town after town with names like Enada, Bet Jabil, Maroon Ross, which is right on the border with Israel. And late at night, we came into a town with the name of Cana, which we know in the Christian faith as Cana, the place where Christ is said to have performed his first miracle. Cana or Cana became known to us because of news reports of a 1,000-pound bomb that was dropped on an apartment house, exploding and crushing women and children who had sought shelter at the lowest level. Elizabeth and I wanted to go to Cana late at night, if only to pay our respects to the families of the victims. We went there without an armed guard. We went there only with interpreters. We came into Cana at about 10 o'clock at night. The headlights were the only lights in the village at the time that we came in. And we asked through the interpreter where we could go to visit, were there graves? Yes, there were. The entire town square had been converted into a graveyard. And so we were led to the graveyard, which was illumined by the lights of the vehicles that we were traveling in. And we had a small group of people came to explain to us the the deceased, and there were rows and rows of pictures. And Elizabeth and I walked slowly along the rows, and at this one picture we stopped, transfixed, at the picture of a little boy who could have been 3 years old, fresh haircut, cherubic countenance, smiling brightly, blue shirt, red sweater. And it was the kind of picture that years ago you take your child to a department store and have taken. It had that look and feel, and you just had to smile for a split second until you realized that this child lay under your feet. We stopped at this moment, and suddenly an arm came around and comforted me as I was crying. Elizabeth and I were both moved deeply as we stood at the grave of this little boy. And this arm comforted me, moved me close, and it was a gentleman who was obviously one of the villagers. And we moved with him to the next grave. And through an interpreter, he said that we saw a picture of a woman and 3 children. And through an interpreter, he said, "This was my family." Moments ago, he was comforting us. This was my family. We left that site with that bereaved man and walked across the street and over a huge pile of rubble and down it and into the area where the bomb had exploded and where the building fell and where fragments of the bomb were still mixed with fragments of clothing. And suddenly the village understood that an American congressman was in the village. And 60, 75 people just appeared out of nowhere. And what happened at that moment, I will never forget as long as I live. Voices called out from out of the crowd, which by this time was being lit by little motorbikes that had shone the light on the crowd. A voice cried out, "Tell the American people we love them. Tell the American people we don't like your leaders, but we love America. We love America. We don't mean any harm. We don't hate Israel. We want to live in peace." The humility and the humanity of these people who had lost everything suddenly reflected in this heartfelt plea. Tell the American people we love them. This message I bring you, that we bring you from Kana, is a message of the capacity of people who have been stripped bare with the curse of nothingness to respond from their hearts to try to heal the world. Those who have lost everything appealing to us out of love. This message from Kana then becomes the potential for transformative love, for forgiveness, for compassion that we can take to heal the world. All over the world, people are waiting for a new America to emerge, for one that opens up its heart once again, for one that expresses compassion once again, for one that leads from love once again. That, my friends, is the America which resides in your heart and in my heart. And it is time that we let the world Thank you. Thank you. Tell the American people that we love them. So let's have a discussion in the time that we have remaining, and I would be happy to engage any of your questions about anything that you're interested in. And yes, sir, if you could stand up and perhaps we can hear you. If not, you can come up here.
Okay, I'll try and talk loud.
Okay.
Dennis, I so appreciate the message that you've been broadcasting to the world, and I know that you have overcome tremendous challenges in your own life. I want to present you with another challenge. The mainstream media, we know, crafts and shapes presidential elections. The mainstream media, we know, is owned by the same people who own the oil companies and the weapons manufacturers. The mainstream media pretty much succeeded at ignoring you in the last presidential campaign. What are you going to do different this time?
Well, first of all, I don't know if this meeting was advertised on NBC, CBS, or ABC, but somehow people found out about it, okay? Years ago, there was a poet who wrote a work called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." And I would suggest a couple things here. First of all, of course I'm aware of what you're saying. I'm not denying it, but I don't give that power to determine the outcome. I think that we have to give ourselves more credit. We are all mediums. I'm not talking about someone who is surrounding a crystal ball here. I'm talking about we are all messengers. We all have the capacity to create community with our intention and with our understanding and our knowledge. Each person in this room is a community unto himself or herself, has the power to just send a message out around the world. Everything's changed in the last few years. This idea of interconnection and interdependence is also a function of communication. We have ways of getting messages out. And so whether it's emails, or faxes, or phone calls, or knocking on doors, this community and communities all over the country can be heard from in a way that goes over and beyond these machines that attempt to control public perception. The biggest challenge in politics is that when you are in office, or you are aspiring to an office, the psychological dynamic of looking at these institutions and then trying to figure out how you measure up to them. It's very daunting. It causes a lot of people not even to try to challenge the system. But with the help of that great political philosopher, Lewis Carroll, let me bring to you a story that will give you some insight into why Alice from Alice in Wonderland ends up being one of my heroines. Okay, here's the scene. The minions of the Queen are marching on little Alice, okay? And she is convinced that she is so tiny that they are going to do her in. And so Lewis Carroll writes of Alice in this moment of trepidation, suddenly having a sense of courage. And he writes, Alice suddenly grew to her full size and swept out her hand at this advancing, now small, cards and said, "Who cares for you? You're nothing but a pack of cards." Alice in that moment achieved a full understanding of the power of her own humanity. And when each one of us gives ourselves that gift of self-affirmation, of self-empowerment, of the ability to make a difference, notwithstanding those structures in society which tell us we can't change anything, when we take that stand, when we grow each of us to our full size, when we're ready to sweep out our hands and confirm our own power, that is the power to change this country and to change the world. It is in your hands. Besides that, I was a third-string quarterback, 4'9", 98 pounds, and I made the team. Sometimes I was a quarterback, and sometimes I was a football. But you become pretty good on your feet after a while. And I can tell you that this community, Eugene, those from Lane County, Benton, and all over the state, if you started to organize and supported a campaign that truly stood for peace, in the deepest sense of the word, you know, I have the record with all the policies out there, not just leading the challenge and challenging this war in Iraq and voting against every single appropriation. There's no other person running for president has the record I have on these things. But I'm not just challenging this war, I'm challenging the idea of war as an instrument of policy. And of course, it's not just about war. It's about we spend $800 billion in a year from now. We'll be up to $800 billion on this war. Schools falling apart. 1 out of 3 Americans not having decent health care. Veterans benefits being cut. Senior citizens not having the program support they need. You look at all the money that's going another place. So I'm telling you, this is the power of this meeting right now. It goes right back to that gentleman's question. If this community began to organize behind a campaign for real peace and a candidate who stood for peace, you change the world. Because people are waiting to see what's going to happen. They're waiting to see if the American people are just going to be dazzled with an American Idol type campaign, with candidates piling up their money, and that's all it's about, or if there's going to be a deeper discussion about where are we going in the world and who are we. Next question. Thank you.
Dennis, if you should have an unthinkable happen and you do not get the nomination, I would like to know if you are willing to support a candidate who will not stop the war.
Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself. The question relates to, Dennis, you know, if the unthinkable happens and somebody else wins the nomination who is not for peace, would you support a candidate who would not stop the war? I want to share with you the way that I look at the world, because this is why I'm going to answer the way I do. In order to do what I do, you have to have perfect focus and perfect intention. And if you start worrying about another outcome, you dissipate your energy. Fear dissipates one's energy. Anger dissipates one's energy. Being envious of someone else dissipates one's energy. Being worried whether you have enough money or not dissipates your energy. In order to do what I'm doing, you have to proceed with a perfect faith. It has to be perfect. And it has to be aligned with the universe. And then you say, you know, whatever happens, happens. But I am at a position right now of singular focus on the outcome, which is to be a candidate who will bring about a deep transformation of American politics. That's where my vision is. And to do it from the White House. Not to do it as someone who's a message. My message is, I take the oath of office. That's where the message begins. So, I ask those of you who can hold that vision with me, who can keep the faith of the possibility that we can transform this nation, to join with me in that kind of focus, in that intention. And when you have that, you create all new possibilities. I've learned this in my life, and I'm sure there are 100 or 200 people in this room who have learned the same thing. That, you know, if you put that out there, and you put that goal and that soulful intention out there, It creates new possibilities. Let me give you some examples about why I believe I'll win, based on my own story. And this is relevant here. You know, many of you know I grew up in the city of Cleveland, the oldest of 7. My parents never owned a home. We lived in 21 different places by the time I was 17, including a couple cars. Now, with that kind of a narrative, you would come to an understanding that, well, you know, maybe you could just feel, hey, you're lucky to be alive. I feel that way. But you know what? I also have seen circumstances develop where there were times that maybe I thought I was going to fall through the cracks and somebody reached out and said, up here. It's happened so many times in my life. And it's taught me, not just a resilience, but it's taught me about having deep faith. That kind of deep faith when I was mayor of Cleveland, I had to take a stand to save an electric system. I had everybody saying it's not possible. It's already sold. My closest advisor saying, forget it, Dennis, it's over. You're wasting your time. I saw something else. I saw a different reality. I reached out. I called it forward. And it happened. 5 years ago, Cleveland had its steel mill and 3,000 jobs on the line. The mill was being shut down. Everybody was lighting the funeral pyre saying, it's gone. I saw something else. I organized the community. We filed a lawsuit blocking them from shutting down the blast furnaces. We created a new dynamic and a new momentum, and today that steel mill is the largest flagship of the biggest steel-making company in the world. We saved 2,000 jobs when everybody said it couldn't be done. We had community hospitals that have been shut, patients wheeled out to other hospitals. People said, forget it, it's over. I saw something else. I organized and rallied a community. We saved 2 hospitals. One of them still exists with 600 jobs. I've heard people say the library's closed, you can't do anything about it. We organized a community, saved the library and built a new one. Libraries, fire stations, parks, my whole life has been about looking at situations, seeing another possibility, having other people tell me, no way you're going to do it, and seeing that other reality, naming it, calling it forward, giving it force, and you know what? The world changes. I'm telling you, with your help, I can be the next president of the United States. I am ready. You are ready. Betsy wants to know what I really think.
A little earlier today when he was speaking with some of the youth at different times, Dennis was talking about how, and please don't get mad at me, guys, Hillary, Obama, and Edwards, what their plan is, or their ideas are to solve the conflict, I refuse to call it a war, in Iraq. Now, Dennis has a different idea of how to solve that, and actually, I even had that before I read his. So here's him to tell you.
Well, the idea that some people feel, you know, we're in Iraq, we messed it up, now we have to stay. I mean, really, you know, here it is, we invade a country, we're occupying it, people are arguing, well, you know, the only way we're going to save Iraq is to stay. Kind of missing and inverting the cause and effect, the reason why Iraq is in a civil war. The reason why is because our occupation is fueling the insurgency. And everybody knows that. This is why most military experts have long ago conceded there is no military victory here, and our soldiers are caught in the middle of a civil war of our own making. This is a deep tragedy, what's happened in Iraq. It's a stain on our national history, and it is it calls for a response of conscience and morality. Really, we have to ask the question again of who are we? So, I've spent the last year meeting with people around the world talking to people who have been connected with UN missions and peacekeeping and security, looking at the situation as it is and saying, how do we get out? How do we change this? And so here's the plan. And it's embodied in legislation, which I've written, HR 1234. It starts with the assumption that the occupation is fueling the insurgency, that the longer we're there, the deeper the war is going to become. I mean, indeed, we lost 6 of our troops last night. It's clearly a call for a new direction. So what's the new direction? That the U.S. says that we're going to end the occupation, close the bases, and bring the troops home. Now that means that Congress has to stop funding the war. Congress, by the way, be with me on this because I'm going to try to move through this as quickly as possible. Congress, by the way, had no responsibility to pass a supplemental. We didn't have to put up any legislation at all. There was money in the pipeline through mid-July. And that money can be used to bring the troops home. We had no obligation to give the president, as Congress did, but I didn't vote that way, but $97 billion to keep the war going well through the rest of his term. $97 billion. We had no obligation to pass that. The United States must take a new direction. Again, close the bases and the occupation, bring the troops home, but what do you do about the Iraqis? Many people want to focus on Iraq as an American problem. Look, we did something to Iraq that is so abhorrent, but we still have to do something to try to protect the Iraqi people from even more violence. We understand that. With the help of people at the UN, I've come up with this plan that would create a parallel process that you bring in peacekeepers and a security force that you get with the help of nations from the region and the international community to move in as our troops move out. Now, many people would say, well, we'll never get any help. Well, that's because we're occupying the country. But once we let go of those policies, I have met with dozens of ambassadors who all agree. U.S. ends the occupation, it's a whole new world. Takes the troops out, close the bases. So you have a parallel process moving the troops in. I've been told it would take 2 to 3 months to mobilize that kind of a security force as the U.S. moves out, UN and regional security peacekeepers move in. At least half of the force would have to go from Muslim nations. So there'd be some kind of a cultural and religious connection. But that's not enough. Let me tell you the rest of the plan. It's a plan for reconciliation between the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds, which will not happen with the United States occupying. So you get the world community involved, and then you have a chance for a real program of reconciliation. It is a program for honest reconstruction, which will not happen as long as the Halliburtons of the world are still in Iraq. Let me share with you a quick story about how serious this corrupt reconstruction program has been and why everything must change. As soon as the United States invaded Iraq, the promise was to rebuild Iraq with, guess what, Iraq money. Blow up the country, and then you say, well, we're going to use Iraq oil money to restore Iraq. And there wasn't much flinching in Congress when that was said. And so, tens of billions of dollars were shipped over to the United States. The money was converted into $100 bills. One shipment of 108 million $100 bills, $10.8 billion, shrink-wrapped in bundles of $75,000 each, put on pallets, loaded onto a transport plane, shipped from the United States to Baghdad, the Coalition Provisional Authority. $10.8 billion belonged to the Iraq people, was supposed to go to rebuild Iraq, disappeared. The reconstruction that was done, shoddy, cost overruns, cost 50 times what some of the projects should have cost. The Iraqi people didn't get jobs. This reconstruction program has been a criminal enterprise. And we have to end we have to call names here because the Blackwater group represents the regularization of mercenaries so that we create a private army that can keep a war going. And in fact, its intention is to keep a war going because it goes beyond policy, just way beyond. They have no connection to policy. As long as there's a war, they make money. All these people have to be gone. There has to be an honest reconstruction program. There has to be a real program for reparations. According to the Lancet study that was published last June, a conservative estimate, statistical analysis showed 650,000 innocent Iraqis lost their lives at the start of the U.S. conflict. Today, being April 2nd, it's quite possible that perhaps as many as 1 million Iraqis have been killed. I want you to look around at the person next to you. Just look around. Look around you. Because you know what? People look just like us. They feel just like we do. They have the same ambitions for family and for homes as we do. They have the same concerns of family as we do. They have the same hopes for the future as we do. They're made of the same stuff as we are. They may pray to Allah. These people are brothers and sisters. And our nation, in our name, has been responsible for their murder. Now let me tell you, we need to redeem the soul of our nation. And a program of reconciliation and of reparations between the United States and Iraqi people is mandatory. We've got to find a way to repair the war. And we have to stabilize energy and food prices and make sure that if the IMF and the World Bank come in, they're not going to be putting these structural adjustment constraints that cause Iraq to be privatized after the fact, and Iraq has to have total control of their oil assets again. So Betsy asked the question, but just one little footnote. When Congress passed its supplemental legislation, they left in a provision that privatized Iraq's oil, that forces the Iraq government to pass what's called a Hydrocarbon Act, which mandates that Iraq engage in these production agreements with oil companies and leads the way for the privatization of $6 trillion in Iraq oil assets. I brought this up at a Democratic caucus meeting 2 weeks ago, and most members of Congress weren't even aware of it. And so after I made them aware of it, one of the congressional leaders said to me, "Oh, we'll take that out of there." Not a chance. That didn't happen. And so where we are now is that we've created the way for, well, we're occupying Iraq, and when we control their government, we're now saying you're going to privatize your oil to the benefit mostly of U.S. oil companies. To reach out, to put a healing hand on Iraq, to put a healing hand on the Middle East, and on the region, and on this country, to find a way to help heal this planet from global warring as well as global warming. We really are at this moment of transformation. We're required to do it. I remember a few years, reading 20 years ago, about where Mikhail Gorbachev, he saw what was happening in the Soviet Union, and he saw it was falling apart. He said, we cannot maintain what we're doing. He understood that. I think we're at a moment that is as profound in our country's history. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep waging war. We can't keep killing innocent people. We can't keep driving huge deficits, borrowing money for war. We can't keep ignoring the human needs at home. We can't keep having our leaders act as sociopaths in the world community. We have to reestablish our morality, who we are, our goodness, our charity, our fortitude, our courage, our love. Yes, way over there.
Hi, I was just wondering what
torture has been committed in the name of the U.S. government, they all have to be closed, but more than that, we have to go back to the type of thinking that produced that. You get it? And we have to reinstate this principle of habeas corpus, which is I would say that in all of these discussions we're having, yes, it's instructive to know, quote, they, unquote, are our leaders. And they must be held accountable. And I want it said here that every U.S. official who was involved in this extraordinary rendition, who was involved in suborning torture, who was involved in waging illegal war, who is involved in lying to the American people to take us into war, every single one of those individuals, as a matter of our conscience and as a matter of who we are, must be brought to justice. And it's not about who they are, this is really about who we are. Yes. And it's not about who they are, this is really about who we are. Yes.
This might seem simplistic, but I'm a Jay Leno watcher most of the time, and he has offered any candidate to come on his show, and then that means David Letterman, and it means Nightline, and it means Good Morning America, because I think that you've got to get this message out there, and you've got to get it out. Yes, we are the grassroots, and yes, we can do a lot, but get the people to get you on these shows, because then you'll be heard by millions. Well,
I think you're right. I mean, we're looking at opportunities to get on those shows, and you know, I'm ready. You just never know what they're going to ask you to do. You know? Okay, go ahead.
I want to ask what I'm glad you're back. And I want to ask what the environmental component is in the Department of Peace, because I think it's like peace on Earth, and that we're not just connected with other humans, but also with all the other life on Earth.
You're right about the question relates to the environment, our connection with the planet. Oregon has a special relationship with the environment. You know, years ago I was attracted to Oregon because you had a visionary governor by the name of Tom McCall who really understood the importance of protecting the environment and preserving the seacoast for people in Oregon. And I paid attention to that because it was a forerunner of public officials who ought to be involved. Now let's move to another dimension. There was a philosopher about 30 years ago by the name of Morris Berman. He wrote a book called The Reenchantment of the World. What he was writing about was humanity's separation from nature. How the Industrial Revolution created a mentality which split us and made us become entrained and attuned with machines and become masters of the environment instead of realizing, as Chief Seattle said so many years ago, that the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. Now, Thomas Berry, in his book, The Great Work, writes that our great work should be repairing our relationship with the natural world. This, after all, is the place from which we issue. Our connection to all of nature needs to be understood, that we are not at the top of this evolutionary chain. We are part of it. And because we're part of it, we have to look at each link that preserves all life on this planet. And so that means it's time to have a president who has the kind of consciousness which says that we're preserving our own lives when we preserve every species, that we're preserving our own lives when we care about the fate of the entire earth, that we're preserving our own lives when we eliminate nuclear weapons everywhere, that we're preserving our own lives when we sign the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty, that we're preserving our own lives when the president calls forth the country and says, let's use conservation, let's become wise consumers of energy, let's make better choices than we make, let's look at the lighting choices we make, let's look at the products that we buy, let's look at the food that we eat, and how it's raised. Let's support local farmers. Let's find a way to use different means of transportation. Let's support more bike paths. Let's support more walk paths. Let's support more mass transportation. Let's support smaller and more energy efficient vehicles. Let's support a means of moving between cities with interurban. Let's support high-speed rail. Let's support ways where we're not using the kind of oil. Let's move to renewable energy. Let's eliminate non-sustainable sources. Let's not rely on oil, coal, or nuclear. Let's create an environment where we can create micro-technologies of wind and solar and millions of homes, creating millions of jobs. Let's create this new energy and put it out there and get people excited about what we can do to help save our planet. Let's make this a sustainable, soaring call as being citizens of the planet. Let's create this in the same way John F. Kennedy said, reach for the stars. Let's go to the far reaches of the universe when we know today our vision here is here on Earth, that we have to create and heal this world. Tikkun Olam, heal the planet. Let's call that forward. Let that be our chance to heal the world. Let's repair our environment. Let's do that. And let's look at our trade agreements. When NAFTA and GATT and the WTO were all constructed, they were deliberately written so that there would be no workers' rights, no human rights, no provisions for environmental quality principles. Before NAFTA was passed, we were able to have bilateral trade with nations. We could set conditions on the trade. Once NAFTA was passed, we couldn't pass environmental laws that would run afoul of the WTO because they would be ruled WTO illegal. We've given up our right to be able to determine what we can do to use trade to lift up the planet. And so I say that in recognition of that one of my first acts in office will be to cancel NAFTA and the WTO. What does that mean? You have trade with other nations based on these conditions. Follow me on this. Workers' rights. America should be leading the way for workers' rights around the world, meaning the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, the right to strike, the right to decent wages and benefits, the right to a safe workplace, the right to secure retirement, the right to participate in the political process. America should be leading the way for human rights, prohibitions on child labor, slave labor, prison labor. America should be leading the way for protection of the environment, for strong air and water and land protection as part of our gift to the people of the world. America should be leading a race to the top, not one to the bottom. And as President of the United States, and with your support, I intend to take this country in that direction. Thank you. For those of you who are on the web, go to Kucinich.us, sign up, join our efforts. Make sure you contact our campaign. We're going to make a strong presence here in Eugene. We're going to carry the state of Oregon. We're going to sweep this nation and take America.